For many years, Americans had a thing for France, as you can see in this hyper-realistic picture. Everything from long bread, film noir, French fries, and these guys. But all of that changed in my generation when things started going to, yes, that's right, Japan. The Japanese were making this, and they were inspiring this. My best friend begged, borrowed, and did lawn work to buy a Honda Civic. That car was so cool. Nowadays, you can have people like this talking about wabi-sabi. Americans call their bosses honcho, and Japanese people call their bosses grupo rida, which sounds like group leader. And you know what was cooler than cool about Japan? Samurai. Yeah, these hard-as-nails battlefield masters not only knew how to take care of business, but they had this stoic aura that met or exceeded Epictetus or Seneca. Who was the biggest, baddest samurai of them all? Miyamoto Musashi. That's who. He's had many monuments, comic books, video games, and now he's streaming. But let's take a closer look at this guy. Maybe he wasn't just dominating every duel he ever fought. Maybe he wasn't just a challenge to the way everyone looked at samurai. Maybe, just maybe, he was an... Miyamoto Musashi is probably the most famous samurai in Japanese history. He was born in 1584 in the early Edo or Tokugawa period. He had a tough childhood. While he was close to his mother, his stepdad could not stand him. The young Musashi ended up living in a temple with a relative. As if this wasn't enough, he also suffered from a skin condition, probably eczema. In those days, many of the warriors had trouble finding jobs because power was consolidating, and there were less local warlords to hire them. What many of these jobless samurai would do is try to become famous through dueling and see if they could start a school or maybe get hired for a local lord. One day, a duelist came to town by the name of Arima Kihei. He put up a sign that said he wanted to duel. Miyamoto accepted the challenge, even though he was only 13 years old. The priest tried to stop the duel, saying Miyamoto was just a kid. Kihei said he would accept an apology if it wasn't public. Miyamoto may have not known he had been expected to apologize, but while Kihei was all like,
Where am I? What's happening?
Miyamoto came running in from out of nowhere and took down Kihei with a wooden stick. Kihei did not recover. People were impressed that a 13-year-old had defeated a veteran warrior, but others were not so impressed with Musashi's surprise attack. Okay, so remember that one French guy we talked about? Yeah, Jean Paul Sartre. Jean Paul wrote a lot about anguish as a kind of infinite nothingness, separating us from our plans and goals. Many of the people who fought against Musashi not only came to an abrupt confrontation with their plans to be warriors, they also confronted the very close possibility that their lives could quickly come to an end. When Musashi's opponents managed to escape with their lives, many of them wandered the mountains, and some joined monasteries. Musashi also seemed to decisively turn his life direction. When he was 30, he stopped fighting duels to the death. Metanoia, or changing your mind, isn't normally considered an existential topic, but it is an expression of individual freedom. In his book, The Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi emphasized the importance of making critical changes, and this seems to describe something that changed inside him when he turned 30. One of the things that bothered Miyamoto was fake samurai, the people caught up in the exhibition of sword fighting. You can think of fake samurai as sort of like military posers. I'm glad Miyamoto isn't here to see what the dads in my neighborhood do at the end of October when it's time to look for candy. Miyamoto saw that posing and pageantry were not just Halloween things, but also how people understood fighting for and protecting the people. Keep in mind that whether or not you can actually defend your loved ones with katanas from the mall is a smaller issue than whether or not you are living your life for the approval of others.
Was he existential?
Miyamoto Musashi was not trying to be like everyone else. He wasn't trying to get everyone's approval either. He frequently appealed to establishing independence from everyone else. He once fought a duel using a long wooden oar that he had manually shaved into a stick instead of an actual sword. He insisted he hadn't learned combat from any sensei or dojo. He would sometimes show up late to duels on purpose. He wasn't trying to impress people with how premium his gear was or how formal his movements were. He was a very eccentric, individual person. This is one of my favorite quotes. Look at this. The decisive part of what makes you who you are can change at any point. It takes 125 miles for a battleship and all the people on it to turn 180 degrees. But right now, in this instant, you can choose to have any opinion you want. At the end of the day, you only have control over yourself.
What does this have to do with life?
Life frequently comes with moments that would be hard to describe in a book. Sometimes, these things can't be put into words at all. Miyamoto Musashi says in the Book of Five Rings that many aspects of war are like this. He tells us many times, if you want to understand them, a book won't help. Improvement takes careful consideration and actually involving yourself. Okay, so I've got one more story to tell. Miyamoto Musashi is sometimes described as being cold and heartless, but the truth is more like he didn't let his feelings steer his life. At one point, he found a boy whose parents had recently passed away, and Miyamoto adopted that boy soon after meeting him.
And this is the opposite of shallow. This is emotionally magnificent.
More than emotionally magnificent, Michael. Miyamoto was steering off the path of least resistance to go after something that mattered deeply to him. Here's a final note. A lot of people get fanatical about Musashi, but I'm going to take a chance and suggest there are some ways he was not an existential hero. He wrote a list of 21 rules, which I first saw in the manga. Unlike his book, these rules don't come across all that existential to me. Setting aside that I don't agree with all of these goals, he wasn't following some of them as much as other people ordinarily were. Tell me in the comments if you disagree. So taking all of that into consideration, I'm going to put Musashi Miyamoto here, ahead of Solon in the B tier. While researching this video, I read Miyamoto's book, The Book of Five Rings, which I recommend. Also check out the Miyamoto History on Fire podcast. Also, check out the Musashi graphic novel manga. Did you learn something about Musashi Miyamoto? Or about your own life? Do you think he was an existential hero? Let me know what you thought in the comments. Also, be sure to click the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching.